Dementia, Alzheimer's. These words evoke fear in all of us. But what if there was a new approach to managing the devastating symptoms of these conditions? Could the answer lie in a plant often shrouded in controversy? This week, we dive into the complex world of cannabis and dementia, exploring the latest research, potential benefits, and the critical questions surrounding its use. Whether you're a staunch skeptic, simply curious, this episode will challenge your assumptions and offer a fresh perspective on a truly groundbreaking area of study. Join us as we separate fact from fiction and explore the potential of cannabis to revolutionize dementia care. Welcome to Fading Memories. Thanks for joining me once again, listeners. As always, I am excited to have you. I'm Jen Fink, your host of the Fading Memories podcast. With me today is Dr. Dustin Sulak. He is a traditional osteopathic general practitioner, and he's an internationally renowned expert in medical cannabis. He's got 15 years of experience treating patients and educating clinicians about this versatile tool. He is also the co-founder of Healer.com, a cannabis education and product company that recently launched Healer Respite, a hemp-based solution for people with dementia. So thanks for joining me. I'm just going to call you Dustin because if I don't, I will abuse your name.
That's fine. You said it right. Sulak is fine, but I'm very comfortable with Dustin. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you. So I gave the highlights, but why don't you give the audience a little bit more about you? Have you been a caregiver for somebody with dementia?
Not in my personal life, but I've cared for patients with dementia during my career. But no, I don't have that personal experience. So my background, coming into medicine, I was very interested in holistic and alternative approaches to medicine. And therefore, I went to an osteopathic school and I became a traditional osteopath, which is someone that, in addition to practicing medicine, uses their hands to adjust the body to promote health. And early on in my private practice, my state where I was living, Maine, at the time, I'm still here in Maine, we passed a medical cannabis law. And I was pretty much the only doctor in the state that was willing to sign off on these certifications for patients. I had some background in cannabis, like a little bit. I knew it was a powerful tool. I had seen it help some of the patients that I was treating in residency, but I never planned for it to be my career. And then it just completely took over my career. There were thousands of patients in Maine who kind of descended upon my little private practice, and I had to grow. And at the time, there were people on the West Coast in California that had been doing this for 10 years or more. And so I developed some mentoring relationships. I looked in the peer-reviewed literature and was surprised that there was already, even at that time, a lot of evidence supporting the use of cannabis for things like pain and multiple sclerosis spasticity and relieving the symptoms and side effects of cancer treatment. And even back then, there was a little bit of evidence supporting its use in dementia. And so one of the things about cannabis that I've noticed over the years is that it has this great capacity to replace other categories of medications. And pain medications probably top on the list, anti-nausea medications. But then as you go down the list, you start to see some of the meds that are used to treat the behavioral symptoms of dementia. And here and there, I would get patients, whether they were at home or in facilities, and the families were just motivated to say, hey, the doctor wants to start my family member on this dangerous medication. I've heard that cannabis can help. What do you think? And so that's been my kind of journey over the years. I've gained more and more patients with dementia because some of the facilities I work with, when I get good results with one patient, then the staff want me to treat another patient that might be having a hard time. And of course, in those places, when someone's having a hard time, it impacts everyone. And I've had more people who are at home and their families want them to stay at home, but the behaviors are getting challenging and they're looking for a solution that doesn't have a black box warning. So about a year and a half ago, I was thinking, like, how can I really help a large number of people? Like, what's the low-hanging fruit right now for cannabis as a treatment? Because it's such an incredible, so versatile, has such a good safety margin. And it just occurred to me that there are millions of people out there with dementia, and it's really not hard to get good results treating dementia with cannabis. It's not rocket science. I mean, and I saw a patient, and it just kind of put on this light bulb, and I thought, we need a solution. At the time, the biggest challenge was kind of the regulatory. You can't ship these things across state lines, or you couldn't until we solved that problem. There was a lot of red tape getting it into facilities. Even when states have medical cannabis programs, a lot of the facilities don't want to participate. They're scared they're going to lose funding. And so I went to work on how we can overcome those hurdles and get the right medicine to the people who need it. That's what we've been doing.
So what kind of things should we consider when choosing cannabis over, that drug is going to slip my mind now, the black box one that they use for aggressive type behaviors? I've got a friend whose mom is on, what is that drug? Oh, it's going to kill me. I can't remember the name of the
drug. It's probably like quetiapine or olanzapine. It's one of the usually where doctors start are the second generation antipsychotic medications. And so yeah, Seroquel.
That's the one.
Yeah, that's and there's several of them, and they're all very similar, and they do carry a black box warning, which for the listeners who don't know what that means, it says, well, yeah, you can use this medication, but just be aware that there's a very high likelihood that using it to treat one thing is going to cause some other really bad problems, namely movement disorders, higher risk for falls. Increased risk of mortality. So literally like dying sooner is likely when you're on one of those medications. And they don't, you know what, they might help with the behaviors, like they might stop the exit seeking or the self-injury or the aggressive behavior towards others, but they don't seem to make the patient happy. It's like, it's not a good quality of life. A lot of times it's just kind of being drugged and sitting around, and then because they're not moving as much, they become more rigid, and there's a lot of problems with those drugs. I think those drugs are actually better than another class of medications, the benzodiazepines. So that's like the Valium class, but they're both bad, in some ways. But I understand why they're used when there's no other option and the caregivers are having a hard time dealing with these behaviors. You have to do something. You can't strap people down. I mean, it's perhaps the best alternative for people that don't know what I know.
It's a good point. Fortunately, they're not having the black box issues yet. They're aware of them. So, it's mom needs to be in the memory care community, but she gets very obnoxious with the other residents. So this is the solution so that mom can stay in the residence. That's the best place for her. It gets very, very complicated. It's, which I'm sure you've experienced because, you ended up on this journey of treating dementia with cannabis. So, if this person that I know wanted to consider switching their mom from Seroquel to cannabis, what would they need to consider, and like how might they go about that? If they were having black box, issues, other side of, but really negative side effects.
Sure. Or if they were just wanting to prevent them. The nice thing about cannabis is when it's helpful with the behavioral issues, it's usually helpful with other things as well. Like they started for one reason and then they say, oh, look, there's been no Tylenol PRNs. This person's in less pain. Oh, they're sleeping much better. And all these other things start to get better. And in the meanwhile, they're smiling. They're communicating. We don't have a lot of good data on this and we don't see this very often, but the cannabis doesn't only suppress the symptoms. Sometimes it helps the brain heal. So there are case reports and at least one clinical study where in addition to an improvement in agitation and what we call the neuropsychiatric symptoms, there's been improvements in the mini mental status exam. So literally the cognition improving, people's memories getting better. That's not something you see very often. I mean, the two approved Alzheimer's drugs, the memantine and the Namenda, Oh, those are the same, the Aricept and Namenda. They, they might like stabilize or prevent the progression of the cognitive decline for like 6 months. You don't often see any treatment reversing it. And there is some evidence that in some people this happens with cannabis. So what would we do for in an ideal world, your friend's mom would have a local cannabis doctor like me that could examine her, go there, take care of her, communicate with her doctor and say, here's what I want to do to start treatment and kind of make it a personalized thing. That's just not possible for most people. Like there's not that many people like me, and it can be hard to find. It can be expensive. So that's the solution that we designed. That's exactly what it's intended for. So we have hemp gummies. They're made from what's considered hemp, cannabis flowers that have less than 0.3% THC. And when we put them in gummies, because the gummy has a certain weight to it, we can actually include clinically relevant doses of THC with the other cannabinoids, with CBD or with CBG, and it still stays below that 0.3% for the federal law. So we can ship it. I'll show you what it looks like. This is the packaging that it comes in. Oh, let me see if I can make it not so blurry. So it's in a blister pack. This pack is empty. It's just for demonstration, but it'd be gummies in a blister pack. And there's 2 stages, stage 1 and 2. Stage 1 is the lower dose, stage 2 is the higher dose. And then there's gummies for daytime and nighttime. So you give this in the morning and in the afternoon, and you give this at night. And basically we would ship this to your friend. It would come with a usage guide that explains how to use it and a symptom tracker to track whether there's improvements or not, and a clinician's guide as well. So she could share that with the attending clinician. It would give all the information about what we're doing. She would not have to stop the Seroquel first. She could just continue it. She could add in the cannabis, see what kind of results she gets with the cannabis. And then at some later point, her doctor could decide to try tapering the Seroquel and see what happens. And if she didn't have great results in the first month, then she could go to stage 2 in the next month, which is a higher dose. We also, and it's more than just a product. This comes with, so in the clinician's guide, there's an order sheet. You mentioned that she's in a facility. She would need an order for this, but the order would be like ordering vitamin D or ordering some supplement. This is handled like a supplement, not a medication, but it just makes it so easy to have it in the blister packaging, and also useful in case somebody's self-administering and wants to know, did they remember the dose or not? It's very obvious if you can write the little date on there. So that's how we would handle. We have an order sheet for the attending clinician, and we would really encourage that clinician to read the few pages of the guide and then put a couple check marks and sign off on the order sheet, give that to the staff, and this would be administered in the facility. So we have a nursing hotline that goes along with this. If somebody's kind of wondering if this is right, or they're scared to try cannabis on their loved one, or maybe they've started it and they're seeing, they're confused by what the results are that they're seeing, they can talk to trained nurses and get a plan and an educational kind of document emailed to them afterwards. And we follow up with people. So we're really serious about doing whatever we can to make people comfortable with this. But most medications, you don't have to stop the other med first before adding the cannabis. You can leave it alone, add the cannabis in, and then watch what happens and eventually stop the other one if someone's doing well.
It makes sense. And I like that you have the symptom tracker, because that just keeps everything all in one place and makes life a little bit easier. And I know that they've had to up this loved one's dosage of Seroquel, and I don't know, I guess I would assume you get to a point where you've maxed out. So it would make sense to try the cannabis with the Seroquel so that maybe you don't have to up the dose anymore. So I know they've done it at least once, maybe twice.
And that's the thing, you mentioned earlier, this person doesn't seem to be having severe side effects. That's great. There are some people that respond to very low doses of these antipsychotics. And at those low doses, the severe side effects like the movement disorders and other things, those are less likely to happen. But as you start escalating, because what happens in most cases with dementia, especially when there's no, kind of no medicine that's protecting the brain, right? It's just kind of covering up the symptoms. You expect there to be progression. And if the problem today is aggressive behavior or self-injury or just yelling all day long, whatever it might be, that tends to get worse over time. And if you're just suppressing it, then you might need a higher dose of this suppressive medication. So that's really something that's different about cannabis, is that, and a lot of people don't know this, we have this internal physiologic system in our bodies that they named the endocannabinoid system. It was named after the plant cannabis. For a few decades leading up to the early 90s, researchers were wondering, how does THC do so many different things in the body? Like, it can relieve pain, it can relieve nausea, it can relieve itching, it can decrease inflammation. Like, it does so many different things. And they found that we produce compounds in almost all of our cells that are identical in their activity to THC. It was, and now we know animals have been doing this for a very long time, like 400 million years. A sea squirt has a cannabinoid receptor that's almost identical to the one in human beings. The plant cannabis evolved maybe 40 million years ago. So animals have actually been doing this for a lot longer than cannabis has been around. But it just so happens that this system is not, it's not like a pain relieving system. It's a homeostatic system. It's a system designed to maintain balance at the cellular level. So when a tissue or an organ starts malfunctioning, the cannabinoid system turns on to bring it back into balance. And that's especially true in the brain. We have more cannabinoid receptors in the brain than any other type of neurotransmitter receptor. So more than serotonin or dopamine or glutamate or GABA. And so when you take something like this and it's helping with sleep, or it's helping with pain or behavioral symptoms, it's probably also helping bringing the physiology back to a more normal state. It could potentially be treating the underlying condition. And this has been studied in a surprisingly extensive way in rodents. So they take rodents, either kind of normal, so-called normal laboratory rodents that are very old and have the expected amount of cognitive decline, or they also have special genetically altered rodents that develop that earlier. It's like these Alzheimer's models of rodents. And when you give them cannabinoids in their late stages, they start behaving similar to young rodents in the tests that they go through. They have to solve mazes and solve puzzles and stuff. And then at the end of these studies, the researchers autopsy and look in the brain, and they do imaging on the brain. The brain volume looks like a young rodent. The genetic expression of the brain tissue is much more similar to a young rodent. It's almost like giving these, and they're low doses, giving these low doses of THC to the demented rodents turns their brain into a young rodent's brain. It's incredible. Now, I don't know that we can do that with humans. Like, a lot of things are very simple in rodent studies, and they're much more complex in people that are genetically diverse and have, all sorts of other things going on. But some of the case studies and the clinical studies do suggest that, again, we're not just treating symptoms, but we're healing the brain.
That's really interesting. So are you familiar with the early stage treatments, the lecanemab and the donanemab?
I am. I
shouldn't have had to learn to pronounce those.
That was impressive, by the way. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of controversy around these treatments. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but it looks like even recently, and I didn't see the details on this, but it looks like some of the evidence came out around how the beta amyloid target in Alzheimer's, the evidence that was not the correct target has been suppressed. Why? Because these drugs were in the pipeline, and it's just so expensive to develop them and get them approved. But like, there's this time lag, right? The pharmaceutical companies start trying to solve a problem for beta amyloid, and that's like maybe a 5-year project or more. And during those 5 years, the researchers say, like, you know what? It doesn't seem like beta amyloid is the causative problem anymore. Like, yes, that's there in the brains, but that's kind of this innocent bystander. It's more of an effect than a cause. And just targeting the amyloid and getting rid of it, I don't know. It doesn't work that well. I mean, it might help a little bit, but now they're focused on like the tau protein tangles, right? Much more than the beta amyloid. And we're going to probably see expensive biologic drugs come out for that in the next few years. And maybe in the next few years, the researchers are going to figure out, wow, tau isn't actually the main problem here either. There's something else. So there's this lag, and this is what happens with allopathic medicines that are going after single proteins or single targets in the body. It's like one molecule going after one target. Our diseases are much more complex than that. You know, when you look at a diagram of all the different proteins, receptors, enzymes that are involved in the pathogenesis of Alzheimer's, there's many, you know, like dozens. And so it kind of makes sense to use a treatment that works alongside the body's healing mechanism that's already built in, that can do all these things instead of just picking like one out of those 36 targets and saying, let's push on this one really hard and see if we get a result.
That was what I was going to ask. I met a physician who was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's about a year ago, and he's been on, I think it's lecanemab, and claims he's having a good result. There was a treatment partner that he knew. She ended up with the brain bleed, so had to discontinue the treatments, which was, you know, devastating to them. And so when I'm listening to you talk, I'm like, well, it seems logical to me with my non-science brain here. I'm an artist, so complete opposite of science is if you put the cannabis with these, and this is more than I needed to know, these monoclonal antibody drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's a better combination than just the infusion drugs alone. You have a thought on that one?
They could be used together. And the other thing about cannabis is that its protective effect on the brain, at least in animal models, and there's a bunch of observational human evidence to support this statement, it can protect the brain from the damaging effects of a bleed. So if someone were to have a stroke or a brain bleed, regardless of the cause, if there's cannabis on board, it's going to limit the damage. And so, yes, that they would be compatible to be used together, and cannabis might be protective against some of their bad side effects. But I don't know that it's needed. Like the rodent models where they give THC, the beta amyloid plaque goes away, but it's not going away because the THC is targeting it. It's going away because the THC is restoring the physiology. The beta amyloid plaques are like the body's response to a problem. They're supposed to show up to help solve a problem. The thing that happens in Alzheimer's is they just keep showing up and they don't go away, and they start clogging up the system. So I don't. I mean, I know these drugs do help some people. Like I've seen the clinical studies. They get some results. You know, it'd be kind of like if your car isn't driving well because it's leaking oil. You know, this might not be the perfect analogy, but yes, you can pull over and pour oil in, every 40 miles or something, and your car's going to run. But that you would be much better off to take it to the shop and fix the leak, even though that would be an expensive fix. Like I feel like removing the beta amyloid plaques is just a temporary solution. The underlying pathophysiology hasn't changed. And then, of course, these drugs are just super expensive and not everybody has access to them. And I don't know if you know this, Jen, but the reason they're so expensive is because these are not chemicals. They're not chemical molecules that you can make easily in a lab. These are very complex proteins that have to be made by the immune system of an animal.
No, I didn't know that part.
These drugs are produced typically in rabbits, in the body of the rabbit, and then the blood of the rabbit contains these antibodies. It's purified out of there. I mean, it's a kind of a disgusting thing in some ways. Now, I'm not against using animals to help with human health, but I do kind of shudder at the idea of somebody needing an infusion for the rest of their life that, it's just so expensive and produced in this way. But that's okay. Like it's going to help some people. I don't think necessarily it should be taken off the market. I hope there's a lot of post-marketing surveillance, because once these drugs are used extensively for a few years, they need to look back and see really how many people are having the brain bleeds, and is the trade-off worthwhile?
I kind of compare it to, and we've been pretty blessed in our family. We have like almost no cancers, but the early cancer treatments were pretty brutal and expensive and not super effective. And now we have like targeted treatments for specific cancers. So I'm kind of hoping that these initial drugs, because they already abandoned aducanumab.
Yep.
I bet they come up with easier names. Um, so I'm kind of thinking, okay, well, we're at like first base with these drugs as compared to like, cancer drugs are, they're in the maybe hopefully the final innings. They're close to the end of the game comparatively.
I think so.
Well, I'm glad.
But it's the whole strategy. Like for cancer also, the idea is we're going to allow this cancer to grow and develop, right? And then we're going to treat it. Like there was some physiologic disturbance that preceded the cancer, because we all have cells that go cancerous and our immune system kind of nips them in the bud all the time. So why was there this vulnerability? And the researchers, to very little extent are looking there, but they are. Same thing with dementia, right? Dementia for many people is going to start years or even decades before they show clinical signs of it. And to me, it makes sense to say, well, how can we promote health and prevent the disease compared to what can we do once it's already gotten, 10 years in and the person's having the symptoms. So I feel like even just the whole paradigm might need to shift to cross the finish line.
I agree. I love it so I do a lot of volunteering with the Alzheimer's Association, which is the biggest reason I know how to pronounce all these drugs. Yeah. And that's where I've learned probably the majority of my information, but I've also talked to neurologists and other researchers and a lot more science people than I ever expected to do in my life. And, we get these treatments and they're all excited. We're in the era of treatments is what they like to say, which I laugh a little bit and I wish I could find it. I think I might have got rid of it, but I had one of those rubber like advocacy bracelets that said, we're looking for the first survivor of Alzheimer's by 2025. Guess what? We're in 2025. I don't think we're going to find a survivor this year, which, you got to set goals, and they didn't hit that one, which is unfortunate.
What does that goal mean? Like to have someone that's completely reversed the disease?
I guess. I'm not even sure they really got to a definition just because, they missed that mark so far, but, it's been interesting to read about the drug trials and all just everything that goes on behind the scenes with creating what little treatment we have. But so we're in the era of treatments, they like to say. And all of a sudden they pivot to all of these lifestyle choices are so important. It's like, yes.
Well, I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work, and might be someone to shoot for getting on the podcast, but Dale Bredesen, you are familiar.
I read his book, and I actually have a past episode with he and another gal whose name I cannot remember because it's been too long. They co-wrote another book, and she was on the show.
I mean, to me, that's kind of some of his cases, I would say, fit the definition of surviving, reversing, whatever, curing. I'm not sure what you want to call it, but, and of course, his strategy isn't based on a single treatment, right? It's based on a protocol of many treatments, lifestyle interventions, supplements, sometimes drugs. We're just so complex, right? This whole FDA approval process. And by the way, I think like the various Alzheimer's associations, of course, they are doing good work and they need funding to do their good work. But guess where the funding comes from? I think who are the biggest donors? They're the producers of these hard to pronounce drugs. Yep. And nobody's really funding the research, the type of research that Bredesen is doing. Why? There's no money to be made in that. Well, not none, but not the big bucks, because you need a single drug to cross the finish line with FDA approval to make those big bucks. And Bredesen's work isn't based on a single drug, right? You can't do this with a single drug. Like even these aren't single drugs. These are combinations of compounds found in the plant. This would never be FDA approved, even if we did all the clinical studies. There's just too many different things in here. Maybe we could simplify it and get it across. There actually, I don't know if you saw, but there were a few headlines just last week about a study that was reported at a conference. They're using plain THC. So there's a drug called dronabinol. It's approved for chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting and AIDS wasting syndrome. So all the pharmacies have it. It's simply THC in a pill. It's nothing more than that. And they did a clinical trial in dementia controlled study with just dronabinol, and it seems like it's working. Now this is similar to these gummies here. I'm not surprised, but this is a generic drug now. It's been generic for years. The likelihood of the FDA approving an old generic drug for a new indication like Alzheimer's dementia or any type of dementia, it's almost zero. Like nobody's going to get the money together to put that through. So, there's the new approved drugs are one thing. I hope they come up with great interventions. The other, problem is that like lifestyle interventions like Dr. Bredesen, protocols, and then cannabis, like these are not going to get mainstream unless we spread the word about it. But what you've got is over a dozen small clinical trials, right? They might have 40 people, or I think one of them had like 100 people. That none of them are thousands of people. But when you look at these trials, they're incredible. Like the agitation goes way down, like cuts in half or more. The quality of life measures go up. The agitation, I mean, it's like, and then the qualitative data, you've got the researchers describing how people are just happy and much easier to take care of. I think, oh, and I guess the other thing that I'll throw in there is we were talking about the Seroquels and all those antipsychotics. None of those are approved. Right. Those are not, those are approved for something else, but they're not, well, maybe one. I think one got approved, lurasidone, got approved for treating behavioral disturbances and dementia. All the rest of them are used off label.
Yep, I've heard that. It gets complicated.
It's complicated, but we have a solution. And now we've got a solution that we can ship across state lines. And we've made it very easy for people to get started with this. I know it's not going to help everyone, but and I don't even have the numbers yet. But when you look at these clinical studies, it could be like 9 out of 10 people that try this thing end up saying, "Wow, this really helped. I want to stay on it." There's going to be some people that it just doesn't work for, of course, but and then when they stay on it, that's what I'm really curious about. Are they going to halt the progression of the disease or maybe even reverse it? I think the longest study that was more than just a case report, I think followed people for a little less than 2 years. So that's a pretty good amount of time. And by the way, that study was out of Switzerland. They also did like extensive research using the people with dementia in the study, giving them the cannabis and giving them tiny amounts of other drugs and measuring their metabolism of those drugs. And what they found was that the cannabis treatment wasn't interacting with all these other drugs. So at this dosing range, there's a very low likelihood of having a drug-drug interaction like that. I love it that work has actually been done in humans. You can't say that about really high doses, but all the doses that we use in these respite products here are very similar to what was being used in that study. And so there's going to be outliers and kind of exceptions, but most people can do this without worrying about drug-drug interactions.
Yeah, that's important. My dad had diabetes and died from kidney failure. Shocker. And he was on like 26 different meds. And it was like, they don't even know what these things are doing, interacting with each other. I mean, it's just like, I referred to it as pharmaceutical sludge.
It's never been tested before. It's too hard.
Yeah. Well, maybe with quantum computers, they might be able to figure it out, but seriously.
I think so. But that complexity approach to medicine is not financially beneficial yet. I hope that it is. Like if you look at other fields of science, like, biology and physics and all these things, the very comfortable with complexity theory and applying it to their field. And yes, the computers are going to help with that. In medicine, it's not as attractive because we're back to single molecules with single targets and FDA approvals. Like the complexity is a nuisance. It's not a benefit.
Is the FDA approval so narrow just because of the risk factors? Like, I don't think I've ever had somebody explain that they're kind of looking at something that's targeting one molecule, or, it's that narrow a window of treatment. I hope that makes sense.
A lot of it has to do with the drug development process. They start with these, cell studies, and then they progress to animal studies. And so these are very reductionistic type of models in which to test out a new treatment, but they have to pass through those gates in order to make it to clinical trials to even begin with. So it's kind of like the whole paradigm is just super reductionistic. It doesn't have to be. I mean, it can be. It can change, and I think that there's certainly examples of it functioning differently. But when it comes down to FDA approval, why do the FDAs of the world prefer drugs to be single molecules with single targets? Like, why are there almost no new approvals for drugs that are anything but that? Compounds of drugs. Like, you'll see 2 approved drugs from the past eventually getting combined together, right? So there's some like blood pressure drugs where they'll have like losartan and hydrochlorothiazide combined together, and then suddenly it's patented and it has a new name, and you can get some more mileage out of it because the old ones are generic. Maybe we'll see some of that happen, but no, I'm discouraged with the whole incentive behind drug development. I think it's quite backwards. It's served us in many ways, but there's so much more progress that we can make. I'm not holding my breath, though. I know there's millions of people out there that are suffering right now, and their family members want to keep them home, and they want to see them smiling and sleeping at night. And let's do it. We've got a solution.
That's so interesting. A question popped into my head and then it escaped. Oh, fudge. I hate it when that happens. We're talking about, okay. I had a college professor that used to talk, and then poof, he'd say, well, that brain cell died. And then he'd go off on the next topic and be like, is that going to be on the test? Because you didn't finish explaining it. And that's exactly what just happened to my, which is pretty rare, actually. It must be because there's no sunshine and I am solar charged. I do know the Alzheimer's Association they're going to create their own clinical trial of the diabetes drug. Starts with an M.
Metformin.
Yes, that one. Thank you. See, I'm not on pharmaceuticals. I'm on like supplements and hormones, but I don't take drugs for anything else. I keep saying I've seen some specialists in the last year. I am like, I'm done. Too healthy to see specialists now. Thank you. But I kind of think that one's kind of interesting because we know that increased blood sugar is bad for our brains. Mm-hmm. And, metformin brings the blood sugar back down.
Yeah, it's cheap. It's got a well-characterized safety profile. If it worked, that'd be great. I just, and it depends who they're recruiting for the study and how long the study is, because I would expect that approach to work in the very early stages, before the damage is done. And I think our capacity to do surveillance and catch it early is improving. And I think that would be great. And then who would make money off it? Not a lot of people, but who would it help? Millions of people, right?
Well, I just think it's interesting that they're going to fund this study. I don't think we hear about that too often. Okay,
that's true.
That brain cell that tried to escape came back.
Oh, good.
Well, but I'm going to ask a different question first. They're getting a lot closer to being able to use a blood test, like in your general physician's office. If you think you've got, you're experiencing, brain cells that go wandering away in the middle of a conversation more often than not. And there's people that are like, we shouldn't be screening for diseases if we don't have symptoms. And I understand that theory, that feeling, but with Alzheimer's, by the time you have symptoms, it's almost too late. So would you think that screening early, say maybe at age 60, which does eliminate people who do get it before they're 60, and then maybe going on something like your gummies. What do you think of that protocol?
Yeah, I mean, we do it for so many things, right? And maybe it's because maybe we get the official guideline recommendations because those are diseases that have more clear treatments. But we're screening for diabetes. Like, let's use metformin as an example, right? You go to your regular doctor, and it's not even at a certain age. If your BMI is up or you're demonstrating some symptoms, then it's screen you for diabetes, and if you have it, put you on something like metformin. We know that works for diabetes. We don't yet know that that works for early stages of dementia. But I don't know yet that we could use a product like Gila Respite to arrest the development or the progression of dementia. The animal studies say yes. The human data is non-existent. I would love to gather some of that. What I think what makes a lot of sense, though, are the lifestyle approaches that Dr. Bredesen is pushing. And he calls it the cognoscopy instead of the colonoscopy. It's like, it's a battery of tests, right? It's not just relying on phosphorylated tau in the blood, which is, probably going to be that new test that you're talking about. It would be several markers and put them together, and they kind of paint a picture. Oh, here's this person's likelihood of going on to develop dementia in the next 10 years. What can we do to intervene right now? And a lot of the answer to that is like the same stuff you would do just to be healthy and happy in general. It's get good sleep, exercise, reverse insulin resistance and diabetes if it's there, use your brain, be active. It's, it's all the good stuff in life anyways.
All the things we know we're supposed to do. So my general physician is a doctor, like you, a DO.
Okay.
Which one, it's literally like 5 minutes from my house, which no other part of our healthcare system in our network is that close. It's ridiculous. Maybe one of these days I'll ride my bike over there, although I do have to cross a highway. So we'll see. He sent me to an internal medicine doctor because he didn't like the fact that I was taking hormone replacement therapy to prevent hormonal migraines, which I get. I realize that that's like, I'm drinking beer to prevent a hangover. It's like, no, that doesn't really work. I mean, I guess it could, but I don't drink, so I don't know exactly how that would work. But she did, I had this extensive blood work on hormones and all the vitamins to the point where the poor phlebotomist had to use both arms because the right one was clogged. I think it was like 15 vials. It was lovely. Thankfully, I'm not super adverse to needles. And the results of the vitamins in my system was really interesting because of my family history of dementia. So my mom had Alzheimer's for at least 20 years. My maternal grandmother had vascular dementia. My maternal great-grandmother had dementia. So, not a great family history. So I was on a maximum B12, and my test results came back. So my B12 was off the chart. It was like, oh, too much. So I don't take that one anymore. We upped the vitamin C and the vitamin D, and there's a bunch of other stuff, but it's like, I take
Well, what was the conclusion about the hormones, and were they bioidentical or the kind of fake hormones?
I think they're probably the fake ones. So all I take is estrogen and progesterone.
Yeah.
Say
those are typically the bioidentical ones.
okay.
Same thing your body makes. And in my opinion, using those to treat migraine when needed, it's a great strategy. I've done that in my practice. I've seen good results with that. And as people age and kind of extend our lifespan beyond what our ancestors enjoyed, sometimes it makes sense to use the hormones for longevity as well with good results. So I support you in doing that. I'm glad you went to someone who knows what they're doing.
He was skeptical, and I just looked at him and I said, I got these from it's a clinic that specializes in it, not a compound. Another word that's going to slip my mind. I'm like, the reason I'm not using them anymore is because they can't ship their stuff to California. They're in Florida. I'm like, but there are new clinics that specialize in hormone replacement for women. I'm like, if you think I'm going to stop, you're out of your mind. Because I've had one migraine since I started, and it's been almost 3 years. And that was the weekend that Biden dropped out of the race last year. My husband brought COVID home. After 4 years, we finally got the one and only case of COVID that I will ever have. And I woke up with a sore throat and a migraine. And it was like, oh, holy hell.
Okay. Well, a good reason for that. Yes, I think so I'm curious, do you have any experience since you brought up migraine with cannabis?
Um, I used, I actually used gummies, like extra strength ones, in 2021 when I had shingles
Oh,
because of COVID and where the rash was on my lower ribs. Told my doctors, different doctor at the time, that I could take a full and deep breath, but it felt weird. So that sent her down the wrong path. And so by the time I was diagnosed, it was too late for the antiviral to work very well. And why the heck I'm not, I really didn't want to do gabapentin, but I didn't tell her that. But she's like, oh, try Motrin. Yeah, that was ridiculous. That didn't work at all.
yeah.
And she,
But did the gummy help?
yeah, and I actually had a topical, it was a THC CBD product in like a roll-on. So it was like a roll-on deodorant. Oh my God, it was a topical pain treatment. That worked great.
Good. Good for
It
you.
much better than gabapentin, I'm sure. I had a dog on gabapentin. I've had two on gabapentin.
And so for the listeners that are curious, sometimes doses of cannabis can be used with all benefit and no side effect, and including you don't have to be high or drowsy or groggy. Um, and sometimes when you go too far on the dose, you get some of those things, which might sound bad, but it's so interesting, Jen. In most of the cannabis studies, yes, they list euphoria is one of the adverse effects. Right? Euphoria is the
I
negative.
agree with that being bad.
No, it's not bad. Even one of its definitions in the dictionary is feeling well despite having an illness. Like getting a little bit high. But some people, when they think about cannabis, they think like, whoa, I'm going to have like this psychedelic experience. I'm going to be all out of control and impaired. No, like it might just be like feeling good, but still being able to walk and talk and function in every way. So when you were treating your shingles with cannabis, were you impaired or were you fine?
Just the one time that I took, let's see, so I had a tincture, which those taste terrible, and the gummy, and I felt fine until I stood up. I'd been watching TV or reading or some, normal, typical
Yep.
late evening activity, and I stood up and I was like, oh, uh-oh, the room is like, whee! I'm
Gotcha.
just tilting and spinning a little bit.
Yeah.
And
You might have had a little more than you needed, or it might have been a little, some people get low blood pressure, and cannabis can reduce the blood pressure a little bit. So that's one of the things that we mention in the guide is if somebody is just being treated for hypertension with a normal blood pressure drug, it's usually fine to add cannabis. But if they're being overtreated, like if they're getting too like double medications or too many and their blood pressure is already borderline abnormally low, starting cannabis could cross that threshold. It could bring it down just a little bit more. It doesn't bring it down a lot. But then you would start to get dizzy when you're standing up. There actually was a study in people with dementia administered THC where they were measuring their gait to see if there was a risk for falls, and that it was not significantly altered in the doses that they were using. And I've never seen it, and none of the other clinical studies have ever reported a fall related to initiating cannabis. So I think that's one big concern. It just doesn't show up. I think people feel dizzy or clumsy, but they're not actually. They don't fall down.
interesting. I have really good balance because years ago I worked with a personal trainer who is 13 years older than me, and she was very big on, we lose our balance as we age. She was helping me lose weight, and she said, you lose more weight sitting on your butt if you do weight training. I'm like, okay, I'll do it. I still hate it, 15 years later, still hate it, still do it.
But you like the results, right?
I have both of my knees are like rusty hinges, and doing the weight training has strengthened the muscles around my kneecaps so that I can do things easier. And it's like, why wouldn't you? It's like I do weight training so that I can do the things around the house, or, do the life things that need doing. And it just makes it easier because, I'm not getting any younger. My paternal grandmother lived to 103. So that's my goal So I got like 45 more years to go. So that's a long time, and I really don't want to do a knee replacement. So better keep up with the weight training. And it's amazing when you're like putting something over your head. I'm 5'2", so everything goes overhead. It seems like, everything is up here. And it's just so much easier to do things, and you feel more confident. You don't feel, like I jump up on the edge of the tub. It's a freestanding tub, and it's at least 2 feet high. It's pretty tall to water a plant. And I don't feel, I'm careful because I don't want to go face planting in the tub. That would not be fun. But I don't feel like it's a big risk. It's like, yes, do it and be careful. Don't just hop up there like a crazy person. But it's just nice to be able to do things easier than that I used to be able to do when I was younger. So that's definitely a nice feeling. It makes doing the stupid workouts easier. So the one thing I was going to ask, I kind of, I'm not shy about my age. So, I obviously grew up in the 80s with the just say no. And, are we still suffering from the, THC, marijuana, plant-based medicine bad, or are we getting away from that a little bit more? Because I know back in, was it 2016 when California when the voters approved recreational marijuana use. And because I have a friend, grew up with this boy across the street, it's like, it's amazing how lifestyle choices can dictate our, everything.
Sure.
He should have started school a year later. He was barely 5 when we started kindergarten, and he was very susceptible to peer pressure. And he started on pot when we were about 13, and that led to harder drugs, which led to a lot of ugly stuff. His life is much better now. He's cleaned up. He's actually a drug counselor. He's turned it around, but he had to go through some pretty ugly times. So I was like, is it a gateway drug? I don't know. I voted yes. I'm like, people drink, and we don't question that as much as I think we should. I'm like completely a sober person. And
So the stigma is still there and still gets in the way. Like I think it depends where you live. I went to a conference a couple of years ago in Kansas City, Missouri, where cannabis is legal to have adult use, to have medical use. Just across the river, there's the state of Kansas, where the police are literally just busting people on the highway driving from Missouri there. And that's what happens. You get one of those charges, and you are eligible for student loans. It affects your career when they do background checks. So I think there's still a big impact depending on the jurisdiction. But the impact that I see is that people are too scared of this stuff. They've been instilled with fear that cannabis is something so bad they have to fear it, that when they get sick, they're unwilling to do it, and their family members got to work on them, and then eventually they kind of cross the line and get into my office. And having an hour with me is pretty helpful. But I just wonder, like, how many people will never entertain the idea of using cannabis for dementia because of the stigma that's been fed to us for decades, that this is the devil's weed. It's not. This plant is one of the greatest gifts to humanity from the plant kingdom. I mean, what we've been talking about this hour is the medicine that this plant produces, which is an incredible medicine. As I mentioned, we're kind of hardwired to respond to it in all of our organs and tissues of the body. That's just one aspect. You look at the agricultural and industrial applications of cannabis or hemp. We have the longest, strongest plant fiber in the whole plant kingdom. That means when you make a fiberboard out of it, it's lighter and stronger than any other type of fiberboard. The seeds are highly nutritious. The roots will actually suck heavy metals and toxins out of the soil to clean up the soil. I mean, you've got the hurd, which is the center of the stalk that can be used to make concrete. It just goes on and on and on. This plant is incredible. It's almost too good to be true.
Doesn't it also have pretty flowers?
Yeah, they're pretty. I mean, they're stinky. I'd say the odor is more pronounced than the visual, but they're pretty. I mean, yeah, we grow at Healer. We have a partner farm here in Maine. You know, we go out and see the hemp fields, and they're just beautiful. They're very inspiring. They like grow up tall. They reach for the sky. They got these nice fan leaves, and then once they start flowering, it's an incredible aroma.
The reason I ask is because we have a family story, a family friend. They were this couple fairly newlywed, and they guess they were having the in-laws or somebody over for dinner. So she was picking flowers, wildflowers, and one of them happened to be marijuana flowers. And so it was kind of a family joke that she had, pot flowers on the table for the in-laws or whoever it was. It was, somebody that would have definitely not approved. And this was probably in the 70s. Was definitely, a ways back. So that's why I've never actually seen one. So when I get to Maine, I'll have to look you up so I can go see the flowers because it'll be cool. This is why I have to live to 103. I have a lot of things left to do.
Yep, yep. It's nice. The flowers are nice. Shall I just quickly share a picture of me in the hemp fields? I've got one here.
Definitely.
Okay, let me just
And for those that aren't watching the YouTube version of this, I will share this on social media.
okay, let's Oh, I can't do it. It says that my screen sharing is disabled.
I can fix that. One's so I can. Oh wait, it's over here. There we go. Now it should work.
Okay, let's see if we can do that. But I love visiting the fields. It's just amazing to have this plant. So there you see me just kind of leaning over. These plants aren't ready for harvest yet, but they're getting there. And those kind of cone-shaped tops of the stalks, those are the flowers. So it's not a single flower, it's a compound flower. And over time, the bigger leaves will drop off, and you'll just kind of have this cone. But that's where the medicine comes from. You know, it's a good place to have medicine, a nice organic farm with healthy soil, grown out there in the sun, renewable resource available year after year. This is good stuff.
That sounds like a great place to end, but I didn't realize that you could make like fiberboard out of the hemp. It's like,
Yep. Yep.
Apparently we have some, what do they call it? Lobbyists that are preventing more research into the benefits of this plant, probably because of the stigma.
Right. It goes way back. Henry Ford used hemp panels in building cars because they were light and strong. I mean, it was used for the canvas, like the canvas that covered the caravans. Like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were hemp farmers. A lot of people don't realize this, but hemp agriculture and exportation of hemp was one of the major economic forces in the early colonies and early United States. We were selling hemp overseas. We were using it for ropes and sails and canvas. So it's the industrial side of hemp has been around for quite a long time, and even hemp was in pharmacies. A lot of people don't know this. Until the late 1930s and early 1940s, almost any pharmacy you went into would have a tincture of it would be called cannabis indica, or sometimes they call it Indian hemp. And if you look online, you can see these old tincture of cannabis bottles made by the major manufacturers that are still around. Like Eli Lilly was making a cannabis tincture and selling it in pharmacies all across the U.S. What happened in the 30s was Texas was successful in discriminating against Mexicans by passing anti-cannabis laws, and at the time, no one really understood that what the Mexicans were smoking and calling marijuana was the same exact thing that was in our pharmacies as tinctures. And then at the federal level, basically it was the Bureau of Narcotics. They were no longer fighting alcohol. Like that prohibition had been rescinded. This was a big government agency, and as we all know, once they get big, they usually don't go away. They usually just want to keep getting bigger, and they needed a new target. And it wasn't just the Mexicans; it was the blacks, the jazz musicians, and they wanted to make marijuana illegal. And attorney from the American Medical Association testified. It's a great speech. He testified to Congress. And he said, you can't make marijuana illegal. It's the same thing that we have in our pharmacies. This is cannabis. It's the same thing. And it's also going to hurt the farmers. It's going to hurt our industry. You can't make this illegal. And that was the statement from the American Medical Association. But they passed it anyways, of course. And here we are now trying to undo all of that. So I feel like there are so many people that we can help with this. Thank you for helping me spread my message, Jen. We've tried to make it very easy for people. So you can find all of this. We have two websites. We have healer.com, which is where all of our complimentary cannabis education is. And you can find a link from there to healercbd.com. That's where our products are. And these are called the respite gummies. And it's not just gummies, it's a whole solution. You get the gummies, but you get the information for your doctor, you get the nursing calls included. There's a handful of states that are actually where we're unable to mail it. Unfortunately, some states have passed hemp laws that make it so we can't mail it there, but most people are going to be able to get this in the mail and give it a try. And so far the results we're seeing are phenomenal.
Well, I think it's worth trying because like I said, I don't drink because the stuff that I like is just ridiculous amounts of sugar and calories, and I'd rather have a brownie. That's my justification. Not that brownies are good for you, but you got to pick your.
You mean a cannabis brownie, right?
I think
I wasn't sure what you were talking about. You mean just like
just a regular brownie.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you say that because people do eat cannabis brownies. I usually don't recommend it because they're too delicious and it's hard to know what dose you're getting. And for something that stimulates appetite, the brownie is probably the number one reason I've seen people do poorly with cannabis because they eat a brownie, they wait an hour, it hasn't kicked in yet, but they think, oh, this isn't a strong brownie, I'll eat another one. In the meanwhile, maybe their appetite is starting to get stimulated by the first one, and they might eat two more, and then 4 hours later, they're a mess. So if you're for people that aren't familiar with the dosing of cannabis, I don't recommend trying a brownie. I recommend trying a product like the ones that we sell. We have other, gummies, tinctures, capsules. Everything at Healer comes with a dosage guide or a usage guide that tells you how to get started, how to adjust the dose, what to look for. We're a big fan of the worksheets. So we have all these little trackers and worksheets so that you can observe yourself and mark it down and see how you're responding. But this is it's a powerful solution. So thank you for helping me get the word out.
You're welcome. And the websites are linked in the show notes. Everybody should remember that. And my personal experiences, it's worth trying. It's not going to kill you. It's not like experimenting with pharmaceuticals, which is almost backwards from what, those of us that grew up in the 80s were taught. So, if your loved one is not doing well on other medications, maybe talk to your doctor and get more information from Dr. Sulak and see if this is a direction that you should try. So I appreciate you reaching out and sharing this information with us because, it's complicated and we need more than, one or two solutions. So I thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you too.